On a steep orchard slope outside McMinnville, Oregon, a farmer hauled back on the brake of his new crawler and felt the machine refuse him. The clutch would not release. On a side hill, with a loaded track he could not stop or steer, a runaway is not a scare. It is a coffin. The man who built that machine, a small Yakima dealer named Jesse Lindeman, sat 300 miles away and did not yet know that 6 of his first 10 crawlers would fail the very same way. This is the machine John Deere built to break Caterpillar. To understand how a one-man shop ended up building John Deere's first weapon against the largest machinery company on Earth, we have to go back to a merger, a broken handshake, and $5,000 that a pair of brothers did not have. Jesse Lindeman was not an engineer by training. He was a farm boy from Cass County, Iowa, born in the autumn of 1899, who came home from the First World War, cooked for the Army, and drifted west to the Yakima Valley looking for work selling implements. In 1922, the lumber company he worked for collapsed. Jesse and his brother Harry Lindeman went to the auction of its leftover stock and walked away with a pile of implement parts worth about $4,000, for which they paid $158. That pile of salvage became a business. They sold crawlers because the Yakima Valley demanded them. The orchards climbed the hillsides, and a wheeled tractor could not hold a line on that grade or fit beneath the low apple branches. So the brothers sold Holt machines, the tracked tractors that everyone in the valley trusted. Then, in 1925, 2,000 miles away, the Holt Manufacturing Company merged with the CL Best Tractor Company to form a single giant. That giant was Caterpillar, and the new company did not want a small independent standing between it and its customers. To keep the franchise, the Lindemans would have to put up $5,000. By the family's own telling, they could not raise $500, let alone $5,000, so the dealership was gone. Sit with what that meant. A pair of brothers who had built something out of $158 of scrap watched the company they had championed decide they were not worth keeping. What they got, instead of a machine to sell, was a lesson in how a giant treats the people beneath it, and that lesson would sit in Jesse Lindeman for the rest of his life. To see why Caterpillar could afford to treat a dealer that way, you have to understand what the company already was. It had formed that same year, 1925, out of 2 older track builders, and it took its name from an idea Benjamin Holt had put on the ground in 1904, a tractor that rode on continuous tracks instead of wheels. By the time Lindeman was bolting tracks onto a Deere, Caterpillar's flagship crawler, the machine they simply called the 60, had already sold close to 19,000 units. It weighed better than 20,000 pounds, put 60 horsepower to the belt, and in 1931 Caterpillar had begun building it as a diesel, which helped make diesel the standard fuel of heavy equipment. But the machines were only half of the fortress. The other half was the dealers, a service network built to keep a customer's iron running with parts and mechanics, no matter how far out the job was. That was the mountain a one-man Yakima shop had just decided to climb. The brothers did not fold, but the years that followed were hard in every way. They picked up a franchise for Clitrack, another crawler brand, and kept selling tracks into the orchards. Then, in 1930, Harry was killed when his car slid off a steep embankment near Chelan, Washington. Jesse lost his brother and his partner in the same moment, on the same kind of slope that would haunt his machines for the next 20 years. He kept the doors open anyway, and as the Great Depression closed in and farmers began counting every gallon of fuel, he made the move that changed everything. Around 1930, the shop took on John Deere because a Deere tractor burned cheap distillate instead of gasoline, and in a collapsing farm economy, cheap fuel sold machines. John Deere made a fine wheeled tractor. What it did not make was a crawler. And in the Yakima Valley, where the work was on the hills, A tractor that could not climb them was of little use. Before we roll on, if watching a single machine decide the fate of two giants is the kind of story you came for, and you are sitting in front of the television right now, take a second and press the like button under this video. On most smart televisions, that means using the arrow keys on your remote to move the highlight down to the row of buttons beneath the video, landing on the thumbs up and pressing the center button to select it. While you are down there, slide across to the red subscribe button and press it the same way, so every machine we pull out of the archives lands in your feed. Now, back to Yakima. So Jesse Lindeman did the thing that would define him. If John Deere would not build a crawler, he would build one himself, out of a John Deere. Around 1932, he took a John Deere Model D, the heavy two-cylinder workhorse, and bolted a set of best crawler tracks and rollers underneath it. It was crude, but it worked. And when word of it reached Moline, Illinois, the man who ran all of John Deere came to see it himself. Charles Deere Wyman, the great-grandnephew of the company's founder, stood in a Yakima shop and watched a converted Deere crawl across the ground. Jesse never forgot the moment. As he told it years later, there he was, just a little dealer, warming his feet with the top man at John Deere. Wyman, by every account, was ecstatic. There was a hard business reason behind that excitement. The manager of John Deere's Portland branch, a man named H.G. Murphy, who happened to be a cousin of Wyman's, had been watching Caterpillar eat the region's hillside and orchard business for years. Murphy could see exactly what Deere was missing. If Deere wanted to compete in the West, it needed tracks, and Lindeman had just proven that Deere tractors could wear them. The company began shipping Jesse bare tractor chassis to convert. The conversion was real engineering, not a bolt-on. A wheeled tractor puts its power down through two driven wheels and steers by turning them, while a crawler rides on a pair of tracks and steers by braking one side, so the other pulls the machine around. That is exactly why the steering clutches mattered, and why they would one day fail on a hillside. Lindeman had to marry Deere's two-cylinder engine and transmission to a track frame, rollers, sprockets, and a steering system that John Deere did not build and had never designed. He was finishing a machine that Deere had only started. The first machines were experiments. Lindeman built a run of early crawlers, roughly 100 of them, that collectors today call the flatbacks, and then a low, narrow orchard crawler shaped to slip under the branches, of which only about 26 were ever made. They were proof that the idea worked, not a business that could last. But they told Deere and Lindeman the same thing at once. There was a real market here, and the machine could be built. What came next would be the machine that mattered, and it would nearly end the whole project on a hillside. The tractor was the John Deere Model BO, a smaller two-cylinder machine, and Lindeman rebuilt it as a full crawler. Between the late 1930s and 1947, roughly 1,675 chassis were shipped from Deere to Yakima to be turned into crawlers. That number is why collectors chase the machine today, rare and strange, and the true beginning of John Deere on tracks. The crawler weighed a little over 4,400 pounds. Its small engine made somewhere between 16 and 19 horsepower, and it sold for under $1,400. Each bare chassis cost Lindeman about $500. Here is where the story turns, and where the danger comes in. The first 10 crawlers off the line used clutch plates that ran metal against metal, bathed in oil. On flat ground, they worked perfectly, and that was the trap, because Lindeman had tested the prototype on flat ground, at the Congdon Orchards, right there in Yakima. Flat ground hid the flaw, and it only showed itself on a hill. 2 of those first 10 machines were sold to that orchardist near McMinnville, Oregon, whose fields were all side hills. To hold a straight line across a slope, the operator had to ride the uphill steering brake almost constantly, and that friction cooked the clutch plates. The hot metal began to shed fine particles that packed the gap between the plates until the clutch would no longer disengage. On a flat field, a clutch that will not release is an annoyance. On a loaded machine pointed across a steep grade, it means the operator cannot stop the track and cannot steer it. Jesse Lindeman, by his own account, was up against a brick wall. Then he heard the worst news. It was not one machine. 6 of the first 10 were failing the same way. A defect like that, in a young product from a one-man shop, could have ended everything. Deere could have walked away and gone back to selling wheels. Instead, the Lindemans fixed it, fast, with their hands. The answer turned out to be Chevrolet dry clutch plates riveted onto the steel, and Jesse's younger brother, Joe Lindeman, drove the repair himself, running new plates on overnight trips that stretched from Vancouver Island in British Columbia all the way down into Oregon, machine by machine, until the fleet was safe. That fix saved the machine, and the machine went on to establish John Deere in the crawler business for good. The whole arrangement was strange. One of the largest farm equipment makers in the country spent more than a decade selling a crawler tractor that it did not fully build. The tracks, the steering, the whole idea of putting a Deere on a hillside came out of a small shop in Yakima, run by a man with no engineering degree. Deere supplied the tractor, but it was Lindeman who made it into something a Western farmer would actually buy. For years, the two of them together were the only thing standing between John Deere and a complete surrender of the crawler market to Caterpillar. The Lindemans knew that kind of work, and they knew its cost. This was a family business in the hardest sense. Jesse had already buried Harry on a Washington roadside, and before the whole story was over, another brother, Ross Lindeman, would die suddenly at just 45. They built the machines, they drove the parts, and they carried the losses themselves, all while a company 2,000 miles away decided how much they were worth. By 1946, Jesse Lindeman had done it again, converting John Deere's newer Model M to tracks that November. And this time, when Charles Deere Wyman came to Yakima and saw the work, he did not just want the crawlers. He wanted the company. The negotiation was quick, but Jesse protected himself. He carved his own inventions, a two-way plow and a hop picker, out of the deal before he signed, partly because the Federal Trade Commission was already circling John Deere over another rivalry, and Jesse wanted no part of a fight that was not his. Then, days before the sale closed, disaster struck one more time. On the 28th of December, 1946, the Lindeman Steel Foundry burned to the ground, a $50,000 loss. The company John Deere was about to buy watched part of itself go up in flames on the way to the altar. The deal held anyway. John Deere took control on January 1st, 1947, and the price is one of those details that tells you the whole thing was real, because nobody makes up a number like this. The plant sold for $1,147,340.18, plus stock in John Deere, with the larger share going to Jesse. That gave Deere its Yakima works and its first real crawler line. It would not stay in Yakima. By 1954, Deere had closed the plant and moved all crawler production east to Dubuque, Iowa, where it built a plant on the Mississippi River that would turn out crawlers and later backhoes for decades. That was where the fight with Caterpillar would finally be fought on open ground. If you are still with us and you want the rest of this fight, the part where the green machines start landing real blows on the yellow ones, do the same thing you did a moment ago. Arrow down to the red subscribe button under this video and press the center button on your remote. We put out a new machine story every week, and the next one will be waiting for you. Now let us get Deere onto the battlefield. The first machine Dubuque built on its own was the John Deere MC in 1949. It still carried Lindeman's fingerprints, because the undercarriage was his design, and for a while his name was cast right into the track frames. The man who made the MC work was a Deere engineer named Harold Borsheim, remembered inside the company as the father of that machine. It was a small crawler, a little over 4,000 pounds, still a two-cylinder engine. But it was John Deere, top to bottom, and it was the first shot in a war that would last the rest of the century. From there, the machines came fast. The 40C arrived in 1953. Then the 420C in the middle of the decade, which became the most popular crawler Dubuque had yet built, with about 28 horsepower under the operator. The 430C that followed became the rarest of them, with only around 2,240 made. And then, in 1958, came the machine that changed the color of the fight. The John Deere 440 was the first Deere built specifically for industrial work and painted all yellow, and it was the first Deere crawler you could order with a diesel engine, a supercharged two-cylinder built by General Motors. That yellow paint was not an accident. 2 years earlier, in 1956, John Deere had put $15 million into a brand new industrial equipment division, splitting the construction machines off from the farm machines and admitting, out loud, that it wanted Caterpillar's business. And Deere did not go after that business with dozers alone. It built the crawlers two ways, as bulldozers that pushed the dirt, and as track loaders that carried it, so a contractor could buy green for more than one job on the site. Deere backed the money with engineering too. It built its first fully hydraulic bulldozer, with a blade that could angle and tilt 6 different ways from the seat, at a time when plenty of machines still moved their blades with cables. Then came the new generation crawlers of the early 1960s, the 1010 and the 2010, 4-cylinder machines that finally left the old 2-cylinder era behind. And in 1965, Deere introduced the 350 and the 450, the machines that carried its new industrial model numbers and set the shape of its dozer line for decades. The 450 in particular became a fixture on American job sites, a mid-sized dozer that contractors trusted the way an earlier generation had trusted Caterpillar. These were real construction machines now, not converted farm tractors. The 1010 had weighed around 11,000 pounds and made about 40 horsepower, and the line only grew heavier from there. Deere also turned the same crawlers into track loaders, with a bucket up front instead of a blade, and then into the backhoe loaders that would become some of the most common machines on any American job site. Deere was no longer nibbling at the edge of Caterpillar's world. It was building a full line to stand next to Caterpillar's, from the small utility crawler up to the heavy dozer. By the end of the century, the company that had started with no crawler at all would be one of the handful of names that mattered in earth-moving worldwide, a real rival to Caterpillar in the market it had once owned outright. Watching a company claw its way up from no crawler at all to a real rival for Caterpillar is the kind of story this channel lives on. If it is yours too, and you are watching on the television, arrow down to the red subscribe button and press the center button on your remote. That is the one thing that keeps these deep dives coming. Now, back to the fight. Deere kept pushing on the thing Caterpillar was slowest to change. In 1976, John Deere became the first company in North America to put dual-path hydrostatic drive across its dozer line. That is the system a modern Deere operator still leans on, the one that lets a machine hold full power through a turn without spilling the load off the blade. Caterpillar still had the brand, the dealer network, and the decades of history on its side. But Deere had decided to win on the one thing it could control: the way the machine actually moved dirt. And yet every one of these machines, green or yellow, shared a darker fact that no brochure ever mentioned. The seat on top of them was one of the most dangerous places a working man could sit. For most of the 20th century, The deadliest thing about a crawler was not the engine or the blade. It was gravity. A tractor that rolls over on a slope will crush the person driving it. And for decades, there was nothing on most machines to stop that from happening. There was no cage over the operator, no belt to hold him in, nothing at all between him and the ground. The danger was worst, exactly where these crawlers earned their keep. A dozer does its hardest work on ground nobody else can use, clearing timber, cutting roads into hillsides, ripping stumps and rock on grades a wheeled machine could never hold. That is steep, broken, unstable ground by definition, the ground most likely to roll a machine over, and for decades the man doing it sat on an open seat with the tractor's full weight above him. The numbers are hard to read. According to the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, across the years before protection became standard, an average of 132 American farm workers were crushed to death every single year as their tractors overturned. The agency's own director called it, in plain words, an occupational obscenity. Between 1980 and 1985 alone, nearly 800 people were killed in tractor rollovers in the United States, and overturns accounted for roughly 17 out of every 100 deaths across all of agriculture, forestry, and fishing. Sometimes the machine took several men at once. On a fall night in 1971, two bulldozer operators named Thomas Kleperick and Leonard Minot were cutting a fire break with their machines above Santa Barbara, California, when the fire they were fighting turned and ran them down. 4 men on those dozers never made it off the ridge. It was the same seat, the same exposure, the same fact that a person on a slope has nowhere to go when the machine turns on him. The fix existed, and it was simple. It was a steel frame called a rollover protective structure, a cage bolted over the operator, and paired with a seatbelt, it is about 99% effective at keeping a person alive in an overturn. The difference is not subtle. In a rollover without that protection, roughly 40 out of every 100 operators die. With it, that number falls to under 2. One country proved the entire case. When Sweden made the cage mandatory, its tractor rollover deaths fell from 12 for every 100,000 tractors to 0.2 of 1. But in the United States, that cage did not become standard on new tractors until 1985, and for the machines built before then, the protection was optional, an extra the buyer could skip to save a little money. The government eventually forced part of the fix. Beginning in 1976, federal rules required rollover protection on tractors above 20 horsepower that were operated by employees. But that rule did not reach the millions of machines already sitting in barns and equipment yards. And it did not cover the man who mattered most in this story, the one working his own land, on his own dozer, with nobody to answer to but the hillside. Behind the statistics are the people, and the investigators wrote some of them down. One was a self-employed operator, 56 years old, clearing a steep hillside with his own John Deere 450C bulldozer. The machine had a rollover cage. He was not wearing the seatbelt. When it went over, the cage did its job and held its shape, but the man was thrown from the seat and crushed beneath his own machine, in the exact gap the belt would have kept him out of. Another was a logger in West Virginia, 33 years old, in December of 1997, running a crawler dozer that had no cage at all. He was clearing timber when an anchor tree he was using pulled out of the ground and struck him in the head. There was no cage, no falling object guard, and no belt. That was the real cost that sat underneath the rivalry, and it was the operators who paid it. There is a secret hiding under the paint of Deere's biggest dozers, and we need to talk about it. Ask a room full of operators about the largest John Deere dozers, and someone will always say the same thing, that a Deere 1050 is really a Liebherr with a Deere sticker on it. For years, people have argued online about whether that is true. Here is the answer, because we checked it against the trade record, not the rumor. For one specific era, it is true. Under an agreement signed in December of the year 2000, the German manufacturer Liebherr built John Deere's two largest crawler dozers, the 950 and the 1050 in the J series, for the North American market. And for a while it built Deere-branded crawler loaders too. That 1050J ran a Liebherr 12-liter engine, making 335 horsepower. So the operators are right, but only about those machines. Everything from the 850 on down was pure John Deere, designed and built in Dubuque, Iowa. In 2008, the two companies rewrote the deal, and Deere took the crawler loaders back for itself, while Liebherr kept building only the two biggest dozers. Then, in 2014, John Deere brought even those home, launching the 1050K, a machine Deere designed itself, built in Dubuque, and powered with its own engine making around 350 horsepower. It was, in Deere's own words, the largest and most powerful dozer the company had ever built. The Liebherr years were over. Which brings us to the fight that still fills the comment sections, the modern 1050 against Caterpillar's D8. And this is where we have to be honest with you, because both companies publish their own test numbers, and both companies win their own tests. Caterpillar puts out studies showing the D8 beats the Deere in one job after another. John Deere puts out studies showing its dozer moving more dirt while burning less fuel. Thanks to that hydrostatic drive and an economy mode the company says can cut fuel use by as much as a quarter. All of those numbers are real, and all of them are also marketing, funded by the company they happen to favor. The truth on a real job site is quieter and more human than any test. Caterpillar has the deeper dealer network, the better resale value, and the longer reputation for machines that simply keep running. Deere answers with a lower daily cost to run, and with an operator who can plug in and read the machine's own faults without a dealer-only key. Operators who have run both will give you the trade-offs in plain terms. Caterpillar's big engines and undercarriages have a long reputation for lasting, though even Caterpillar had its rough patches, including a generation of engines whose fuel systems gave mechanics headaches for years. Deere machines tend to be cheaper to keep fed, and because an operator can plug in and read the fault codes without a proprietary tool, cheaper to diagnose out in the dirt. None of that fits on a spec sheet. Which machine is better depends on the job you put it to. We spent weeks pulling this story together, tracing serial numbers and reading 80-year-old interviews to separate what is true from what is only legend. If that kind of care is worth something to you, there is a link in the description to buy me a coffee, and even one of them keeps these deep dives coming. Now, let us bring this all the way back around, because the story ends where almost nobody expects it to. Jesse Lindeman never really stopped building. Into his late 80s, he started another company to make tool hitches, and in 1987, one of the hitches he built was for a new machine called the Challenger, the first rubber-tracked farm tractor. The Challenger was built by Caterpillar. Read that again. The man whose crawler had given John Deere its weapon against Caterpillar 60 years earlier spent part of his final working years building a part for a Caterpillar tractor. He called that late work his golf game. He sat for one last interview shortly before he died, in September of 1992, a month short of his 93rd birthday. And that Challenger tells you how these companies really behave, because Caterpillar did not buy the Challenger line. It built it in 1986, and then it sold the whole thing to another company, AGCO, in 2002. Caterpillar walked away from a machine it had invented, the same instinct that had once cost it the Lindemans in Yakima. Which brings us to right now, and to the strangest turn in the entire story. John Deere, the company that was born into the crawler business, fighting a giant that treated people like a line on a ledger, has slowly become that giant. Today, a farmer who buys a new John Deere often cannot fully repair it, because the software that runs the machine is locked, and only a Deere dealer holds the key. There is a reason Deere did this, and it is the same reason Caterpillar once locked down its own machines. A tractor is a one-time sale. The company gets paid once, every 8 or 10 years, when the farmer finally trades it in. But the software inside the machine can be a source of income that never stops, through diagnostic visits, parts, and yearly subscriptions that unlock features the tractor already has. Wall Street has never rewarded the one-time sale as richly as it rewards income that repeats, and so the whole business slowly bends toward locking the customer in. By then, John Deere was not only selling tractors anymore. The company had found a way to keep charging farmers for the machines they had already paid for. To see what that lockout actually costs, picture one of those farmers. A combine goes down in the middle of harvest week, and the screen shows a single fault code, the kind of sensor problem a competent mechanic could clear in under an hour. But the machine will not restart without a dealer's authenticated reset tool, and the nearest dealer is hours away with a backlog, because every other farmer in the county is waiting on the same service truck. The crop does not wait. It stands in the field losing value by the day while the meter runs. That is not a hypothetical. It is the complaint at the heart of the lawsuits. So the farmers did what the Lindemans never could. They fought back. In January of 2023, John Deere signed a memorandum of understanding with the American Farm Bureau Federation, promising better access to repair, but it carried no real teeth, and Deere could walk away from it on 30 days' notice. The state of Colorado passed the first right-to-repair law for farm equipment in April of 2023. The lawsuits were gathered into a single federal case in Illinois, and in late 2023, a judge refused to throw it out, letting the farmers' claims go forward. Then, in January of 2025, the Federal Trade Commission itself, joined by 5 states, sued the company directly. Deere agreed to pay $99 million to settle the farmers' case. And on the 8th of July, 2026, Deere settled with the Federal Trade Commission, agreeing for the next 10 years to hand farmers and independent shops the same repair tools it gives its own dealers. As Wisconsin's Attorney General Josh Kaul put it, a farmer should not have to drive to a dealership to fix his own machine. So here is where the two colors finally end up, a full century after a merger took a dealership away from 2 brothers in Yakima. Caterpillar lost the Lindemans because it would not waive a $5,000 fee, and that single decision handed John Deere the man who built its first crawler. Now, 100 years on, John Deere has been forced by its own government to unlock the machines its customers already paid for. In the end, the color on the hood was never the thing that mattered. The iron outlives the company that builds it, and it always remembers who was allowed to fix it.